Welcome to Supply Circles, stories from the innovators, disruptors and improvers in supply chain management today, brought to you by AI Group.
Hello, I'm James Scotland, the General Manager Supply Chain Resilience at the Australian Industry Group. And in this podcast, I get inspiration and ideas from Australia's leading and best supply chain professionals and thought leaders as I search for the answer to how can we in Australia create supply chains that are resilient and sustainable at a time when we're implementing the challenges of the big 3Ds, the digitalisation, decarbonisations and ongoing disruptions. Today, I'm keen to explore the role of procurement in sustainable supply. I've called the episode Values and Value in Modern Procurement. And my guest is the urbane and erudite Andrew Brightmore. Let's talk about procurement. Once upon a time, back in the last century, back in the old days, procurement was about the businesses, about keeping the businesses operating and to save money, creating value through smart buying. Today, though, procurement is much more than that. ESG, sustainability, modern-day slavery, carbon miles, and much more are factoring into the decisions necessary to be made by the procurement team. One of Australia's leading procurement managers is Andy Brightmore. He is a man of many things. As well as being one hell of a good guy, Andy is the Executive Director of the Compass Group Australia, Australia's largest food and support service organisation. And he's also Executive Director of Foodbuy, the largest food and hospitality industry outsourced procurement capability in Australia. Andy is a true procurement professional with over 25 years in the sector. He is a fellow and senior member of the professional organisation, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. And as a procurement specialist, Andy has worked in 17 countries across corporate, public sector and consulting roles. He now calls Australia home, and he says it's the final destination in his procurement world tour. He's most certainly the person to ask about procurement in supply chain. So welcome to the show, Andy. I know that one of the skills that you need to be a procurement specialist is being able to assess all of the options and make the right decision at the end of the day. Well, I think you've done that. You've chosen Australia over all those other options. What brought you here and how did you come to that decision?
Hi, James. Good to talk to you, and thank you for the best introduction I've ever had. Not that I get many. Look, Australia is just a wonderful, happy accident in my career journey. I grew up in the Air Force. Both my parents were in the Air Force. We moved around the world quite a bit as a child, so I'm a bit of a nomad. And we were living in the UK before Australia. I'd never been to Australia before. I was working for KPMG, looking after a number of engagements all around the world of procurement and non-procurement in nature. And it was KPMG in Australia that rang me one day and said, "Hey, how would you like to come over here?" We couldn't think of a good reason why not. We were keen to work out where the sunshine went in the 364 days it wasn't in the UK. So we jumped on a plane in 2010 and have never looked back. It's absolutely the favourite amongst all the countries I've lived in.
Well, welcome. Welcome to, and you live in a hell of a good city. You live in Sydney, so you get plenty of sunshine, surf, sand and sunshine in Sydney. You're not planning on moving. The kids are settled. That's it, eh?
I think I'm now banned by the wife from moving another country. I don't think we're planning to move from Sydney, not that she's told me. Absolutely love Sydney for everything that Sydney is. But Australia, all of its cities, I'm lucky enough in my role, I spend time in all the major cities and some of regional Australia. Everyone is fascinating. So I've been more than happy to move around Australia. But yeah, Sydney's home. And other than the fact it's been a lot more wet this year than usual, it's typically a bit of a tropical paradise.
In your role, you do get to move around a bit because it's a national role. And I think you told me once that the Compass was the largest purchaser of food after the major grocery chains. Is that right?
It's hard to equate. I think, Compass PLC globally, we're the largest food and support services organisation in the world. We're across 45 countries, one of the most significant employers in the world. And in Australia, amongst our peer group, we're the largest, and therefore, the procurement that sits behind this amazing organisation in Australia is by default there. We're a massive procurer of food, beverage, retail, hospitality products with the supermarket of our industry, I guess, in that procurement scope. So yeah, we're a significant buyer in our industry in Australia.
Well, what appeals to me is to understand how the conversations that you have with your colleagues around the world when you get together in in England or wherever your procurement conferences are. I'm sure you have smarter places than that to go. But are the challenges the same for all of your, obviously different national challenges, but are they basically the same? Is procurement the same all around the world, or have we got unique challenges here in Australia?
I think the honest answer to that is both, James. I think if you take the nature of what we do for a living as a food organisation, where I'm a strong believer that good procurement is good procurement, and the product, the category, the service is an overlay to that. It's a technical skill like any other technical skill, and how you deploy it, it should be largely the same in terms of professionalism and quality wherever you are, whatever you do. Food brings very unique challenges. Food culture, consumers are very different by countries. The supply chains are very different by countries. Australia has that tyranny of distance, which many of your listeners who work on the international supply chain and logistics will know all too well. But it's also well known as a food bowl in the region. So to have this much fresh grown produce and food manufacturing and food distribution in a geography this large with cities this far spaced out is very unique, I think, to Australia. So the way that we do what we do from a supply chain perspective and our strategies may be very different, but at the heart of it, good procurement is good procurement.
It must bring its own challenges for you, though, and for your team here in Australia, because we're so used to having fresh food. If I can just go down to Woolies or Coles and buy some really good fresh food, and every night and every morning I have fresh food. So if I'm in a remote mining camp or a remote, military base that you service, I expect the same. Andy, where's my fresh food? You can't tell me you can't get here. That's got to be a challenge? I mean, really.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive challenge, and you're quite right. We're a fresh food organisation, and when you have this agriculture and this capability on your doorstep, why wouldn't you be? It's an amazing food environment, Australia. But you're right, the logistics of moving food around this country, and which has been seriously tested this year through the environmental conditions that have stopped roads, broken rail lines east to west, following droughts, following bushfires. The logistical challenge of a geography like Australia is immense. So procuring the food is one thing, making sure we provide continuity of supply and service to well over 700 locations across Australia, through rail, through trucks, through ships. We even have helicopters flying in the morning, flying milk around offshore installations outside of Australia. It's an immense challenge, but that's what also keeps it, I think, really interesting for the people in the team, because no 2 days are the same, and the one rule in our business is one size never fits all. So yeah, the geography and the logistics of Australia is extremely important, and I think very different for most of the other countries in the broader Compass Global Group.
I earlier this year, I'd forgot about that. I was going to ask you about COVID, but the climatic conditions were the big ones, aren't they? Earlier this year, we heard of a company in Adelaide that was trying to get stuff to Perth, and they were going up to near Alice Springs and across the athletic track, I think, to get to Perth. They're going probably thousands of kilometres out of their way just to make the delivery happen. I'm sure your guys deal with that regularly. Be creative, I guess you'd say to them.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that everybody expects and deserves is minimum 3 meals a day of a high quality and a high food safety. You can't not feed people. So you think about the last couple of years in Australia, And for me, as somebody who's come to Australia to work through extreme drought, to floods, to bushfires, then to COVID, we have just this year flown food from Alice Springs into the Northern Territories because you just couldn't get through the roads because of the rain damage. The rail line that did go down that moves food from east to west across the country, that went down for a number of weeks. And it's the main arterial line for all kind of capital and non-capital cargo into the west. So yeah, it's a business that you can plan, you can risk test, you can disaster scenario as much as you want. But on the day that something goes wrong, we have to get free food to people because they have a right to fresh food, to have their meals per day. And especially in those remote communities, whether it's our resources clients where, guys are disappearing into tough environmental conditions, you've got to get water to them so they stay hydrated, if nothing else. So yeah, our service is really, really important, not just for the customers, but our people who are on those sites serving all day. We have to make sure our supply chain is capable, resilient, and truly agile when the conditions move against us.
Well, let's talk about that. But before we do, just a reminder about how big the country is. And, it's good to have you as a former Englishman talking about this. Peter Behovey, who was the former head of Volvo Trucks in Australia, told me that when he came from Europe, I think maybe, Holland, I'm not exactly sure, sorry, Peter. But when he came to Australia, they said, hop in a semi-trailer or B-double, and we'll take you up to Darwin. So he went from Melbourne to Darwin and just could not imagine the size. No one could possibly explain how far it was until you get in a truck. And he was building trucks. They said, you have to build trucks for this condition, and it's mind-boggling. You've got the same challenges. You've got to get fresh food within the food limitations, in and out. I guess you've got to get rid of food a fair bit too. They can't just toss it out the back window and let it rot on the ground, can you?
Oh, absolutely not. I think one of the most memorable travel events for me when I first joined this amazing company was to go and visit a cattle farmer in the north of the country and follow the supply chain to our sites. And I can't tell you how many planes, there was a couple of helicopters, there were some quad bikes to get to the cattle farm itself and to stay on this cattle station with the farmer as he talked us through his breeding philosophy, then to follow it all the way back through abattoir, manufacturing, processing to distribution center, and then back out to site. It's a massive logistical operation, which just means that the relationships that we have to have with suppliers across all the tiers and the logistics partners, the drivers that move things from point to point, is just so important to us. And I think that talks to why procurement and supply chain is so much a core part of our business and treated as a strategic part of the business because of that dependency on moving vital product around some amazing geographies and locations around the country. And that's before you get to how we also deliver food, provide services, and try to do our bit for other Australian communities, especially in regional areas as well. So there's another of complexity in terms of geography and distance on top of just the day-to-day supply. It's an immense blessing when you get it right, and it's an immense challenge when something goes wrong.
And I'm glad you said that, because the whole point of this a podcast is to talk about the complexities of supply chain. A lot of people just think, well, it's about putting it on a truck and getting it up to wherever you need to go to, but there's a lot more to it than that. Before we get on to the procurement part of supply chains, you're Executive Director of Food Buy. Not many people would know what that is. It's a business to business, a B2B business. Do you want to just give it a quick explanation, a quick intro to what Food Buy is all about?
Yeah, sure. So Food Buy is essentially a journey of a procurement function, as most kind of procurement organizations are. They're internal functions as part of wider businesses. It's a journey of taking an internal procurement function and rebuilding it with a true sense of customer service, customer first, rather than internal stakeholder as a language, I guess, which most of us use more commonly. And then building the capability, the data, the technology, the systems, and the supply chain and the supplier relationships such that you can then essentially disconnect it from being an internal function, stand it up as its own organization, and offer that capability and those relationships to other organizations across the food and hospitality industry. And that's really what FoodBuy is. It describes that journey from internal function to fully standalone business, if you like, where we have an immense team of not just procurement people, but people from many disciplines right across the FoodBuy business across Australia, delivering on behalf of all of our clients, of which Compass is both our client and our parent organisation.
I remember when FoodBuy was a German idea and you guys were bouncing it around, and you launched it just a little bit before COVID hit, I think. It's been an interesting journey, but from my memory of when you're setting up FoodBuy, you based a lot of it on a set of principles and values around supplier engagement and your team engagement and the market engagement. You sort of spoke a lot about values and principles. How did these foundations serve you when you hit the COVID major disruption? New business, and all of a sudden you hit something that was completely unpredictable. Did you find that your values and your principles were right? Were they set correctly?
Yeah, I think thankfully so. In fact, we kind of deliberately tried to make that happen, if you like. When COVID hit us all of our organisations and all of us, personally and professionally, none of us knew whether it was 6 days, 6 weeks. Who would have known it would have been 2 years and fundamentally changed not just our economy, but our working environments and our personal environments and personal behaviours. So when we were leaning into understanding that this was a fairly fundamental change in the environment, we kind of sat down as a team and said, okay, how are we going to behave through this? What are we going to do? How are we going to reprioritize? What are we going to focus on? And the first conversation we had was, what do we want to be remembered for 5 years from now? And that dictates how we're seen to behave, how we want to behave. Not just how do we want our customers to think of us, but how do we want our suppliers to think of us, and how do we want to think of each other? So that forced us to put our values first. And when I think about how the team, who are separated, as we all were, through state restrictions and lockdowns, we spent 2 years running the business, talking to each other, maintaining our relationships by a video screen, a computer screen. It's those values that were embedded in how our people behave, because they're the ones that live the values. Otherwise, they're just words on a page, right? How they held on to those values and lived by them, that helped us come through the pandemic, but also come out, I think, as a stronger, richer team, to make sure that our clients could depend on us, could trust us, and equally as importantly, that our suppliers saw our behaviours to be ones that supported their businesses, not just through the past 2 years, but to be a customer of choice that they want to continue and building relationships with us long into the future. So I think COVID was a fundamental test of our values, and by putting them forward, I think we served them well.
In the first episode of Supply Circles, Steve Meehan talked about procurement being relationship, that it can't make it transactional. And I thought of you because you've said the same thing for many years, that you don't, that transactional, that percussive type of relationship where you're beating suppliers down into the minimum possible price is not necessarily the way to get the best value. And from that, you put your values. Am I putting words into your mouth, or is it a fair description?
No, I think it's a fair description. I think tactical procurement and price focus, it serves a purpose in specific environments or specific points in time. I don't think either one's sustainable. And certainly if as most businesses are, they look to grow, expand, diversify, then I think you should have a procurement and supply chain function and a suite of suppliers that can fuel that growth and that diversification. So we all have to make sure, and the fundamental job of all procurement teams is to make sure that from a competitive advantage point of view, our organizations are placed in the best spot amongst their peer group inside their industries. But I do think it's that broader sense of value. And as you said right at the top of this discussion, that there's parts of our economy now and our business economy, like ESG and sustainability, that were they were nowhere near as important. They weren't talked about 15, 20 years ago, not that many years ago in the great span of time. They're now fundamental. So I think that the power of supply chain and the relationships you have with that supply chain to find value, invest in value, discover things, and bring them to the organization, and then ultimately to deliver that value and get recognition from that value with the end customer. I think that's fundamentally a very different and very exciting place for procurement and supply chain functions and professionals to be than many years ago. For us, we're a food and hospitality business. We're all about people. Our clients are all about people and consumers, and therefore so is our supply chain. So we're lucky that people sit right at the heart, and relationships sit right at the heart of our business and how we're successful.
But you can have how do you do that? You can have a relationship with your supplier, but with ESG and sustainability and pivots and all sorts of problems, geopolitics, you could say to your supplier, I need to go further down or further up the supply chain. I need you to tell me who your suppliers are, and I need to check them to make sure they're okay. And a supplier is likely to say to you, no, that's my competitive advantage, Andy. I don't want to pass the information on. And so you get to this situation where you say, well, I have to know. How do you manage that situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I don't think there's one answer. I think it very much depends on the supplier, the buyer, the relationship, the trading relationship, the period of time you've known each other. It's all a journey of discovery. And I think the conversation you have with a tactical supplier who you deliberately use in that vein versus a strategic supplier or all the other forms of supply market that a procurement buyer may have. They all vary. I think the one thing is it has to be by design. I think the way that you go to market, the way that you describe to the market the relationship that you want to have or that you're trying to foster or that as a business you need, so that you get the right responses back and the supply market truly understands what it is you're looking for. Lots of people say we're looking for value. Okay, but how do you really define that? What does it mean? And it's not just tangible stuff. A lot of it is relationship, and a lot of it might be future focused and you don't quite know yet. So how you engage with the supply market and set the scene makes those future conversations on how do we realize that obviously a lot easier. If you go to market, if you present yourself as, I just want this thing and I want it as cheap as possible, and that's it. When you come back afterwards and put overlays on top of it, then it becomes a more complex question. But I think the environment evolves, the business evolves, the supply chain evolves, the buyer has to evolve, the relationship has to evolve. There will be some suppliers that's reluctant to take you down those alleyways because they believe it's competitive advantage. But I think if it's competitive advantage, then why wouldn't you share it? Why do you gain competitive advantage if it's not to deliver that, show that, bring that to your customers? And that's what we are. We're a buyer. We're the customer of our supply chain. So if you want to create these pockets of excellence and this innovation, you're not doing it to keep it to yourself. It's because you want to pass it up the chain, and we're keen to see it. We're keen to understand it. We're keen to bring it to our customers. Otherwise, it remains trapped. So I think how you present yourself, how you pick, qualify, how you build your relationships, and I think how you build trust along the way. Once you've started that relationship, I've often heard of the buyer-supply relationship being the same as a marriage. and for some that will resonate positively, and some that might not. I don't know, but like a marriage, the relationship takes time. It's based on trust. It's based on honesty, and it's about both sides delivering what they promise and supporting each other, no matter which end of the environmental change the challenge is coming from.
Yeah, great answer. This idea of values, that you go to the market with your values and just always maintain the same values. And when you ask them to trust you and say, trust me with your suppliers, they'll say, sure, because we've built that relationship. Nice answer. When we come back, let's just get a bit more tactical and talk about the tactics of procurement.
If you have supply chain or business improvement challenges, contact AI Group's Business Improvement and Growth Hub. The Big Hub is a library of practical and relevant resources designed to assist member businesses to grow and improve. The Big Hub also includes an extensive network of experienced, pre-qualified business improvement consultants. For more details, contact big@aigroup.com.au. That's big@aigroup.com.au.
And during the COVID days, we saw a change in inventory management. What many people are saying, moving from just in time to just in case, where you have to identify who your key suppliers are rather than your bigger suppliers. Did your team go through that, or is it a different industry? Doesn't it work in food?
Look, I think we all go through it. The size and shape changes. So we have, as you talked about earlier, we have clients in remote locations that are cyclone zones, and they will have cyclone stock as part of their contingency planning. We have hospitals and aged care centres where patient-specific dietary requirements and allergen-free zones are very heavily regulated for all the right reasons. They're patient care environments where having inventory, having continuity of the right product is everything. Variation potentially can cause harm. So the complexities of moving product and making sure the right inventory is at the right place is no different to anybody else. It's compounded a little bit by the fact that it's a daily fresh business, and that just shapes the supply chain, the logistics chain that sits behind it. But our challenge is the same, and I think disruption to the supply chain is just a lot more immediate for us because of that freshness. So our ability and the supply chain's ability to react quickly is something we have to spend a lot of time focusing on and make sure we test properly.
It sounds incredibly complex. I imagine that the business is data driven. You use your systems more than your people to make sure you're getting the right answers.
Yeah, look, I think we have deliberately made data our differentiator. If I describe my business very simply, at the heart of our business is data, wrapped in a layer of procurement and supply chain that works within a layer of customer and customer service. It's kind of those three concentric circles to paint a visual. But yeah, data sits at the heart of our business. And as we grow, being able to scale through data is a very powerful and very efficient thing, rather than being able to or having to scale without data, which just then becomes more manual processes. So when you look at the hundreds of thousands of products in our supply chain, the kilometers that it moves every day, the power of data to see what's happening, the power to understand where the risk is and to track that risk, and also to use data really positively to help tell the stories of food, to show people the source and the origin, to help people have confidence in how the data supports food safety and allergen management. We have invested a significant amount over a number of years in not just data, but the systems that house it, the supply chain that feeds data in, and the capability in our team of some extremely clever systems, data analytical people that convert all of these. I think we collect millions of attributes of data every year. And that's fine and wonderful, but drawing out the insights, so the pace of picking the data up and driving an action from it, that's really the key. So we all think we're agile, but that data really drives that agility and helps you live it. So yeah, we want to invest more in the people that can bring out the insights and help us make great decisions quickly. And that means we've got to have just the fundamentals of data systems and technology that supports them. It really is a key driver right at the heart of our business.
AI Group recently released a report saying on the digital transformation and talking about how hard it is to find people that can handle the data. A lot of people that can do what you're talking about. Do you, like everybody else, struggle with finding the good people, or are you Richard Branson, bringing the right attitudes and train them?
Oh, I'm blessed with having amazing people in the organisation. Those that have helped us build it, those with us now, and those to come. We're a people business. People come first, and looking after them and their talents and their capability. Yeah, that's what every good leader should be focused on. I think for me, when it comes to data, I've heard lots of people talk about the paralysis of data, and I think there's a very fine line for organisations around having so much data. It's so exciting to see what's happening. It tells you so many things. You end up with 400 dashboards and 17 different screens, and people looking at it and trying to understand and decipher it. How you have a lot of data that gives you simple insights, I think, is the key. So every day I pick up my iPad or my phone, and I look at 3 dashboards, and it tells me the state of the business, and then I go off and do what I need to do. I do believe that from a procurement perspective, and this applies, I think, across lots of professions, but certainly from a procurement perspective, deals are not done by email. They're not done by video conferencing. Relationships are not built in that way. So relationships with customer, relationships with supply chain are typically best done face-to-face in the room, COVID willing. So if we can have a data environment that easily visualizes what the individual needs, so they can leave the desk and go and invest more time in the relationship, then I think that's magic. That's where success and growth comes from. Not having better data and more dashboards to spend more time looking at on a screen. I think that's something I'm very conscious of as we continue to mature our data environment. It's how do we make it simple? And when you get a lot of data, making a lot of data translate very simply takes really clever people to do that. Certainly cleverer than me.
You and I both know companies, particularly suppliers, that say to us proudly, we've got 23 KPIs that we manage. And I always say, no, you've got 23 PIs, performance indicators. What are the keys? What are the key performance indicators? The 2 or 3 that I'll tell you. And I was laughing with someone yesterday about football, where they've got stats on every single player doing every single thing these days. But at the end of the day, did you win? If you don't win, it doesn't matter what that stats are. And the stats don't always add up to winning. You've got to use it as data. It's not. There's nothing magical or mystical about it. It's data that you use for analysis. Let's put your procurement hat on rather than just your compass or food buy hat. One of the issues that you and I have chatted about over the years is the difference between procurement and supply chain management. And an issue that we've heard a lot about over the years is a supplier going to a procurement officer and saying, I've got an innovative idea that will fix a problem. Rather than buying this from me, let's change the contract so that I supply this and it will solve a problem you've got. And the procurement people say, I'm busy. I just want to buy this from you. Just give me this at this price and let's move on. So you lose the innovation. How does a procurement manager make sure that you're picking up both innovation but also that best value or that we were talking about before?
Well, yeah, it's a really good question. And I think where you started in how you describe that question is what I've seen in lots of organizations with a not always a procurement person. It can be a technical person. It could be an engineer. Somebody saying, hey, I've got the solution, and then running into a room and say, hey, guys, I've got a solution. Who wants it? And the folks in that room saying, well, hold on a minute. We never articulated the question to you. We actually want something very different.
Yeah.
And then innovation gets stifled, and people lose motivation, and it all comes crashing down. I think the key is to, and certainly as we described before, what we've done is said, okay, everybody outside of us is a customer. Let's think of them as a customer. Let's treat them like a customer. Let's go and ask the customer, what do you want? What's important to you? What are you trying to solve for? Many customers want many different things, and you build up enough customer sentiment, you now get a picture of the organization, whether it's asking the board level or asking the functional level, whatever it may be, asking the market. We're all trying to understand what is it our customer wants. If we do that bit first, and then we run off into the supply chain to say, hey, I need a solution, who's got something that's interesting? When you bring it back, hopefully more times out of 10, unless the environment or the people have shifted on you, you're going to find people that say, that's exactly what I asked for, or that's interesting to me. Tell me more, engage me more, plug me in, show me how that works. I think a lot of us, and I think human nature is we want to fix things, and we perceive there's a problem. Off we go to fix it. We haven't actually validated whether other people think that's a problem themselves. Where I see that happening, where I see that internal deep customer engagement, I see a marked difference in the relationship between procurement and its organization than I see in other areas where you get that traditional disconnect, and procurement not potentially seen as valued or strategic value adder to the organization versus a transacting function. But I think it's turning that question around, and I do think, and it's served me well over many years, so I'm biased because it's personal experience. When you think of everybody outside of your team as the customer, and you treat them as such, and you talk to them as such, I think you get a very different outcome, and you have a very different frame of mind yourself as well.
But that takes a lot of time. You've got to say to your people, here's the elbow room to be able to build a relationship and to look for answers, rather than just saying, I need to buy 100 widgets at this price.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The day job of all procurement functions is the economic imperative and supply continuity. So, providing the right products to the right spec at the right quality, the right point in time at the right price, that's the day job. And for many organizations, that's what they want from their procurement team. For many others, and I certainly think with things like ESG and all the other dynamics that talk to organizational success, I see more and more organizations expanding the boundaries of what they want from their procurement team. And a lot of it's on the procurement folks and supply chain folks to demonstrate what else they can do as well, and to show the business they can play a broader role. And it's easier said than done in many environments, I know, but I think there's something lost when an organization sees procurement as purely a financial arm as the business, or the transacting arm as the business. And when we think about ESG and sustainability that has to come from the supply chain, and innovation that has to come from the supply chain, the competitive advantage from not having a broad procurement remit, that's a great differentiator between the organizations that are succeeding and those that's going to struggle, especially now coming out of COVID, and as everybody tries to either resurrect their business or take advantage of the opportunities in the marketplace.
Yeah, we're really landing on this point that the modern day supply chain involves a values and a value-driven procurement. You can't just be the old style of give us all the value. The value has to be shared along the supply chain in order to get the most value out of it.
Yeah, I think there has to be a recognition that suppliers have a choice. They have a choice who they supply to. They have a choice who they want to invest their relationships. There has to be a recognition that the challenges in your organization, whether it's inflationary cost pressures, whether it's labor availability or labor cost pressures, they're the same pressures that's being felt in the supply chain. And if you're not building a relationship where you can share those pressures, share the pain, celebrate the successes, and people don't trust or believe that you're in it for the midterm, if not the long term, suppliers have a choice to make of where they want to spend their time and which customers they want to spend their value with. And I think most of us want to be right there in in the center of that radar because you want to be more important than your competitors and you want to get all the innovation from the supply chain. The supply chain has the expertise.
One of the great expressions from episode 1 was in periods of supply shortage, like we are with difficulty getting things in from overseas, bad buyers get fired because suppliers have the hand. I've only got so much supply to supply, so I'll find the good buyers, the ones that are going to treat me right, build a relationship, and make it worth my while. I love it. As bad buyers get fired is not 100% the truth, but it is part of the equation. Just don't think that you've got the upper hand necessarily. It should be an equal hand. We've talked about ESG before. I've got an ethical question for you, seeing as that you're a man of many years of procurement, and I know you like a good question, a good challenge. So defining modern day slavery has been difficult. I know that your organisation is determined to ensure they don't have modern day slavery in their supply chain, but defining it has been a little bit difficult. Unilever recently, or quite a few years ago, defined it as many things, including a fair living wage. So that's an interesting term because it means for every different marketplace that varies. What's a fair living wage in Australia is different from Sri Lanka and elsewhere. And so here's my question: If you were setting up a global procurement setup, and you came across a supplier who was not providing their employees with a fair living wage, ESG would say you need to move on. You'd try and get them to pay them properly. If they don't, you move on to a new supplier. But here's the problem. That would mean that the people who suffer the most are the ones that aren't getting the fair living wage. They'd probably lose their wage altogether if you took your business away. So how do you resolve that? Just going back to your 20-something years of procurement, how do you manage that issue of there's the right thing to do, but there's also the real world thing to do?
No, that's a really good question, and especially in Australia, where the Modern Slavery Act is a relatively new piece of legislation that organisations are working their way through. I think, at the heart of it, we have an absolute abhorrence of modern slavery in all of its forms, and I think there's a recognition that, to your point, every case, every scenario that comes across has to be treated in its own right. Every instance has its own nuance you need to work through. The first challenge you've got is visibility. Where is it happening? Can you see it? How far down the tier of your supply chain is it happening? That visibility is one of the biggest challenges that we're all globally trying to adjust our supply chains to be better at. I think then it's a recognition that at the end of this scenario event, there's a victim, there's a human person that is potentially being abused, having their freedoms constrained and curtailed, and it's that care for the victim that should guide how you react to these situations. In some cases, it's just appropriate to say, I cannot deal with that supplier. There's many cases where that might be the right reaction, but after investigation, a default emotional reaction without investigation, I think is a tough thing to walk through. There's many cases where actually it might be something you can remediate with the supplier, and certainly for organisations like mine who are significant in our marketplace, we have a responsibility, we have an opportunity to change the shape of the supply base, to demand better, to help suppliers become better. And I think there's equal merit in working with suppliers to change their conditions, to provide a better environment for employees to work in. So it's really case by case, but I think at the start you have to be deeply committed to first recognising this is an issue, and it's not an issue in other countries, it's an issue in your own country and other countries. It's a global issue, that it's an imperative for your business, that you have to invest in it. And when those scenarios come up, you have to investigate it properly and always remember there's a victim at the other end and determine the right course of action that's right for your organisation, but hopefully looks after the victim that's at the end of the channel.
Yeah, that really shows values, doesn't it? Having the right value in place means you can make the right decisions. I've enjoyed the chat, Andy. Thank you very much. We've got decarbonisation coming towards us. We've got digitalisation. I'm sure there's going to be more disruptions, including possibly, a global massive inflation. What do you see as the most immediate challenges for supply chain and procurement in the next few months? What do we need to be looking at right now?
Oh, next few months. That's a very short time frame. Right now,
you can take it in 12 months if you like.
Okay, all right, thank you. A little bit more leeway to play with. Look, I think it's about capability. When you look at all of those challenges, and I'm very much biased, of course, as a procurement and supply chain person for far too many years now. I truly believe that procurement is a really exciting profession to have. It's one of those professions that you can stretch and learn as much as you can and be as integrated inside your business, and then stretch outside and being integrated outside of the business. It's an amazing kind of brokerage career between supplier and customer. And I think all those challenges just make the profession really exciting, and the value you can add as a professional and as part of a team to your organization deeper, broader than ever before. But we need the capability. We need great people trained to great standards, supported by institutes like SIPS and great leaders and great environments. Because procurement, as I said up front, it's a people-related, it's a relationship-related skill set. And while we can supplement it with data and systems and apps, the people are the most important. So building capability, investing in that capability, training, development experience, that for me is always the first place that is going to get us through whatever challenges and opportunities that's in front of us, whether we can see them coming or like the pandemic we didn't see coming.
That's a great place to finish. What you're saying is, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that suppliers and buyers and staff are all people, and you've got to get the best out of all of them. And the best way to get that is through having values, clearly defined values in place, and agreeing that you're all looking for value. Work together, but based on some good values. That's great. Thank you, Andy. Thanks for joining the show. And I hope your next 12 months is maybe a bit easier than the last couple of years. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Great pleasure. Thank you.